Well, good afternoon, folks. Welcome to our Housing Colorado mid-ish session update. We're a little bit after midway through the legislative session, but um, lots going on at the Capitol these days, and we wanted to host a time for just giving you an update of where things stand in terms of housing legislation this year. My name is Brian Rossbert. I am the Executive Director of Housing Colorado. We are a nonprofit membership association representing the affordable housing community here in the state. And as you may know, we do a couple of things. We do education work on behalf of the industry, and we also do advocacy work at the Capitol, again, on behalf of the industry, representing your priorities, your concerns, and working to make sure that policies that get enacted by our legislature and signed by our governor are promoting the preservation and production of affordable housing. Just a quick housekeeping couple housekeeping notes. We are recording today's session for those who may or may not be able to join. So we will send out a link to a YouTube posting of the video once we can upload that post session today. We ask that you remain muted during the presentation. We'll have time for questions at the end. We'll come off of sharing a presentation and have a good time for discussion and question asking then. If something is, if you have a burning question, feel free to raise your hand and maybe we'll keep an eye on hands raised and be able to call on folks if there's something that is burning in the moment. Um, we'll hop right in. I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful lobby team of Amy Atwood and Jennifer Mello, who represent us so well at the Capitol and represent our interests so well. We're going to hop right into this presentation today and our mid-session update. Thank you for being with us. Oh, let me just go over the agenda real quick. Sorry, before I hand it over to them. A real simple agenda for our time together today. We'll start with just some context setting, kind of where things stand with the legislature, where things stand after last year's session. We'll talk about the big looming issue, which is our state budget. We'll talk about the bills that we're following at Housing Colorado. Probably don't have time to get into every single bill, but we'll give kind of a high level overview of some of the big bills that we're working with legislators on right now, and then we'll get into a little time of how to get involved, and then we will end with questions. So, with that said, I will now hand it over to our fabulous lobbying team, Amy and Jennifer.
Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for having us. I'm going to just give you a couple of quick general statements, and then Amy's going to take away the context setting. We have 5 weeks left in the legislative session as of today. What that means is that Amy and I are kind of stuck in the Capitol right now. The Senate is debating, just about to start a second reading debate on the budget. So mostly I just wanted to say, Amy and I don't normally sit quite this close to each other. It's possible one of us will have to hop up and go take care of a crisis while we're on this call. That's just the realities of being in the middle of the legislative session. But together we're a team, and one of us will be with you throughout the entirety of this. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Amy.
Okay, great. Thank you. So context setting. If you remember, we just had an election in November of 24. It was the Democrats pretty well swept everything, except they didn't take full control where it's veto proof. So the legislature is not veto proof. So there is the Republicans hold one seat so that the Democrats cannot overturn a veto is basically what that means. It's been an interesting session because of the budget. There's been this looming weight over every bill. If it has any kind of state budget impact on it, it's sitting in appropriations. Not many bills have passed. And with that, we've also seen that the amount of bills that have been introduced it's really low. I mean, it's the lowest that I've seen in a very long time. We're at about like 500, and before the budget and all the orbital bills, we were only at about 523. Last session, we had close to 750. So, it's just really low. The budget and all the orbital bills pushed it up close to 600. We look back on the 2024 session, if you remember, there were a lot of housing bills. There were over 20 that we tracked. This year is shaping up to be just as heavy on housing bills, just slightly different slivers of the housing genre. We had a lot of land use and zoning. If you remember, we had the big 1313 from the House Bill 1313 from the governor last year. That was a lot about density and infill and transit-oriented developments. There was a big push, local control versus state control, when it comes to land use zoning. That is playing out this year again as well. On implementation of those bills, but also there's still that push-pull between the legislature and local governments as to who has the purview on permitting and zoning. So that is a theme that I think we'll continue to see. We saw it in 24, we're seeing it in 25. I think we'll see it in 26. We did see tax credits last year. This year on tax credits, because that reduces the amount of money that comes into the state budget, we are not seeing tax credits. It's not a friendly environment for new tax credits, and some tax credits have been rolled back. We've actually heard that for a couple years now, that a tax credit is less money that comes in, which means it's less money that can be spent. So a lot of the themes that we saw in 2024, we're seeing again in 2025. And the housing bills have not slowed down going into this year. And Brian will go into that later on. Okay, next slide, please. Governor Polis, this is from Governor Polis' State of the State address in January. This was the kickoff. This is his State of the State, where he goes through a number of his priorities. Housing definitely continues to be a priority. He feels that, he wants to make it easier to build housing supply. We have a supply and a demand problem. He's very happy and proud of the things that were done last year, but he doesn't want that to stop looking at construction defects. I mean, that is certainly a priority at the legislature and for him this year. Whether or not that can get across the finish line is still to be seen. So he is certainly hasn't taken his foot off the pedal. And he's also looking at, in that last paragraph, expand choices for housing. He's looking at modular homes. He's looking at speeding up the timelines for permitting. So really, it's just full steam ahead for the governor. And next slide. I spoke about this at the very beginning, the Democrat trifecta. It's the governor, it's the Senate, and the House. Democrats control all three, except by one vote that the legislature cannot overturn a governor veto without a Republican vote. So with that, I think Jennifer is going to talk about the budget.
Yep. The budget is fascinating in how it drives so many of the policy conversations and the political conversations, I think, within this building. And that is always true. Kind of the flavor of the conversation for the last 12 months or so has been giant budget crisis coming. There's no money. We have to make cuts. Don't introduce any bills that cost money. That is the messaging that has been very prominent. And there was a $1.2 billion shortfall in the coming budget year, which is the budget that we're debating today. That starts July 1 of 2025. People are calling it a structural deficit. A lot of how you define how we got into the situation depends on where you sit in the political spectrum, right? Whether you think it's a revenue issue or whether you think it's a spending issue. From a just like a neutral math issue, not enough money to cover obligations is a fair way to describe the situation. Bottom line, right now, there are no proposed cuts to housing programs. So that's remarkable and surprising. And I think leads to probably I think the headline of the last week or two, which is like, it's a really, really bad, terrible budget, except for maybe not quite so bad. I obviously am not a journalist. I could probably use some work on my headline writing. But after hearing all of this for 12 months, this hue and cry, and it's terrible, it's terrible, it's awful, it's awful, it's awful. At the end of the day, they were able to balance the budget. They were able to increase Medicaid provider rates, largely kept K-12 whole, although of course people have feelings about that depending on who you talk to. And really not make a whole lot of super painful cuts. Now, what they're saying is, don't worry, it's coming next year. But I have to tell you, I think that there's a little bit of a sense amongst a lot of us of like, wait a minute, did we just get played? Was this whole crisis not really as big of a crisis as it was made out to be? I actually don't think that's what's happening. And I want to be really clear. I'm not accusing anybody of disingenuousness. I think you know what I'm trying to say there. I think what happened is that they were able to manage this current budget shortfall with a variety of kind of one-time transfers, looking at reserves, that type of thing. Those options will not be available next year. And there is still an ongoing mismatch between the amount of money coming in and the amount of obligations the state has taken on. So it is true that there is a problem with our budget. There is a challenge. The way that in some ways, the Joint Budget Committee perhaps did such a masterful job of managing it this year that they almost made it look like it wasn't as bad. Again, I don't think that is true in the long run, but it's been an interesting dichotomy. One of the main impacts of this whole situation is to really decrease the number of bills that have been introduced that cost money, because just everybody just thought there wasn't any money, right? So what's the point of introducing a bill that's going to cost money? So much so that there's one bill that has a particularly large fiscal impact, but if you add up all the rest, it's only about $20 million, which is just, I mean, I'm not saying that's not real money. I'd take a $20 million bonus if Housing Colorado wants to give that to their lobbyists or something like that. But from a state budget perspective, that's a really small number. So we continue to watch it very carefully on your behalf. We watch the housing programs very carefully. Again, in this moment in time, and we do not anticipate any significant changes to housing, to funding of housing programs. I do think next year that's going to be something we're going to need to be vigilant about and stay on top of for all the reasons I just described. So that's how I would describe the budget in this moment. And Brian, I think you want to keep going and then do questions at the end. I just want to make sure that's correct.
Yes, let's do that unless there's
Got
like
it.
a burning question right now on kind of context or where the budget is. I'm not seeing any hands go up. So we will keep moving along and we're going to get into the bills that we're following at Housing Colorado. Before we get into those bills, I just want to share with you where you can find information on all of these bills that we have. If you go to our website, housingcolorado.org, and go to the advocacy tab into current legislation, it'll take you to this page where there's a link to our bill tracker, which is a really, really, really handy tool. It has all of the bills that we are following. It shows you our position on those bills, summaries of the legislation that come directly from the legislature itself. But then you can also see the positions that other organizations are taking on a bill, links to other documents like fiscal notes and also calendar information when something might be up in committee or on the House floor or the Senate floor, and be able to track a bill's progress there. So it's a really handy tool. We have a new bill tracker this year, which is a lot more robust than we've had in the past. So really thankful for that, and thankful that it stays updated without a whole lot of input from our end. So check that out if you are so inclined, and just, get a sense of what we're up to. I'm going to share, I think the next few slides are just tables with bill numbers, short titles, and our positions on those bills. I'm going to run through a lot of these bills kind of from a high level perspective, and be able to get into any questions you might have as we get to the question segment of our time together. These are in order of bill number. You can see here again, we've taken position on a number of bills. You've probably heard a lot about this House Bill 1004, the one at the top, which is, you know, is about really about algorithmic rent setting. And you may have heard a lot about, some of these companies that do rent setting, and, can kind of change on an hourly basis of what rent might be charged to a potential tenant. We are currently in an amend position. I think we will go to monitor pretty soon on this. The amendments we are seeking were really to ensure that any programs regulated by, say, a program like the LIHTC program, where rent is set by HUD, that wouldn't count as pricing coordination, like an algorithmic rent setting program would be. So we were seeking some kind of uh, exemptions for programs that we operate as the affordable housing community in that sense. There's several other bills on here that we're supporting. 1019 was signed by the governor and allows the Division of Housing to contract with a third-party administrator for some Office of Homeless Initiatives programs. We're supporting a bill about accessibility standards. This is around um, uh, folks experiencing a disability and having housing constructed that that meets their needs. This would require a local government, when they're updating their building codes, to go to the highest accessibility standard possible at that time. It doesn't require them to do it immediately. Um, the 1032, improving infrastructure to reduce homelessness, is a bill that the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless and Enterprise Community Partners are working on. This bill does a few things, most notably, um, uh, uh, I think, well, one interesting thing is that it creates an opportunity for local communities to work together, like a regional housing authority would do, um, but to work together on homelessness and be able to have some taxing authority to address the homelessness crisis in their communities together in a regional way. So, interesting bill there. Um, uh, Protections against deceptive pricing practices has been in the news as well. We are monitoring this bill, really in terms of the housing community. It tries to ensure that there is, at the very least, disclosure about um, uh, fees and charges that are outside of rent that a potential tenant might encumber. Things like common area fees, that either those fees need to be kind of, it goes in two directions. Either they need to be included in rent, or they need to be disclosed up front. So it doesn't eliminate these kinds of fees entirely. It just ensures that there is disclosure about them, or they're wrapped into the rent. And we asked some serious questions around how this would affect voucher holders, and we think we got to a good place and some good answers on that this wouldn't. Um, negatively affect voucher holders as they were seeking um, uh, housing. Go to the next slide. A few here to mention that we've worked on. 1169 is affectionately called the Yigby plus Ed bill. So yes, in God's backyard plus education. This would this bill would create an administrative review process for developing housing on either uh, faith organization owned land or nonprofit educational land in the state. Um, Basically would streamline the process for getting housing built on those kinds of properties. We are in an amend position on this, and we've worked with the bill sponsors to get some affordability um, requirements into the bill. As introduced, the bill did not have any sort of percentage requirements for affordable units to be developed and to benefit from if a development was to benefit from this administrative review process. So that bill has made its way through the House and through Senate committee last week. And we continue to kind of work to hone some of those protections. I imagine we'll go to a new position on that soon. A bill that we worked on that we'll go to monitor on is the House Bill 1207, which um, uh, would have, and the amendment we saw would have required that any LIHTC project be pet friendly. We were really concerned that legislating the qualified allocation plan was a bad precedent to set. And so we worked hard with our partners at Chaffa and other housing organizations to get what was Section 3 of that bill taken out. There's still a requirement for state funding, projects that receive state funding to have a pet ownership allowance in there. So um, we worked hard on that one, and really it came down to not the policy necessarily, but the precedent that that would set. Um, a couple others, real quickly here on this page. 1240 is protections for tenants with housing subsidies. This is an attempt to uh, ensure that voucher holders have some more protections as they seek out their housing solution. We had some concerns that we shared with the bill sponsors on this that seem to have been addressed in a couple of ways, but we're still kind of looking at it to see if there's any unintended consequences for voucher holders that would make it harder for them to get into housing in the first place. Knowing that we have source of income, non-discrimination protections, but landlords still find ways to get around renting to voucher holders. And so just making sure there's no unintended consequences there. And then in 1249 is a tenant security deposit protection bill that does a few things, including making security deposits, limiting those to 1 month's rent instead of the allowance that is currently in statute for 2 months um, worth of rent, as well as being able to um, have a payment plan for that security deposit over 6 months. We've shared our concerns around some of these items um, with the bill sponsors, and are hopeful that some changes will be made to that bill. Um, Next page, there were a couple of construction defects bills this year, which were on construction defects reform was one of our policy priorities and has been for the last couple of years. The first 1261 would have likely made the construction defects issue worse. Construction defects reform coming in the form of trying to make it more economical to build a for sale multifamily product in our state. We're not producing that product currently because of the the way that statute reads and the way that the litigation environment is playing out. So 1261 would have made that problem worse, and we opposed that bill, and it did die in committee a couple of weeks ago. House Bill 1272 is is a bill that's trying to get at construction defects reform from a number of angles, trying to ensure that um, that the litigation environment gets less severe and while at the same time protecting homeowners who might experience a defect in their in the construction of their home. So it's a balancing act that seems to have a lot of support in the legislature at this point. The bill passed like 55 to 7 or 9 the other day on the House floor, and we'll move to the Senate now. So we'll continue to we moved from an amend position to a support position on that bill, but we'll continue to work with sponsors to ensure that that balancing act continues to be um, uh, lived out through the legislation. A couple of other bills that we are supporting. Um, Regional building codes for factory built structures is a bill about trying to have some, um, uh, I guess, sanity to the regulation of modular construction. Um, we we haven't had a strong modular industry in the state since the recession, and we're trying to get that back, but the economies of scale necessary um, to ensure a thriving modular sector, we need to have less one one municipality at a time kind of regulation of this industry, so that um, that these kind of homes can be constructed. So what I'm saying there is, instead of each community having regulations on modular, to which a modular company would have to build to each of those to each of those standards, this would kind of uh, kind of create some regional codes based on um, different regional needs in our state. We have like 6 or 7 different climate zones in our state, to ensure that, if you're building for our mountain communities, you're building for the snow load that you need. If you're building on the eastern plains, you might build to the wind loads that you need. But we don't have, 272 different uh, building codes, so that we can create the economies of scale to build offsite and bring to market this kind of product. So interesting there. Senate Bill 6 is an authority for the state treasurer to invest in below market rate bonds for the construction of affordable home ownership product. This is a bill that's being uh, pushed by the affordable housing community and the affordable home ownership community in particular. It doesn't authorize necessarily a program, but it gives the state treasurer the authority to make an investment that otherwise they couldn't. And the proponents of this bill are um, working to establish the program outside of statute, but the investment from the state would be about $50 million for this. All right, we're almost there. 3 more. Uh, I think the one I want to touch on, um, or the 2 I want to touch on, tenant landlords, law enforcement. We're in a monitor position on this bill. It's a pretty complicated bill that we're still trying to kind of get our hands around, and we will continue to look at that bill. Senate Bill 167, though, it would allow for state funds to be invested in new ways. So kind of using 2 different funds that exist right now in the state to invest in affordable housing development around the state. One is a public school fund, and the other is the Unclaimed Property Trust Fund. And these are existing um, invested uh, funds that would take a piece out of the corpus and invest it in ways and new financing mechanisms for things like home ownership opportunities for public school employees. Um, the part around the Unclaimed Property Trust Fund, we understand, will be coming out of the bill, which was going to address more of kind of your typical home ownership, or sorry, affordable housing programs. And so once that happens, we will need to revisit our position. But we had offered some amendment suggestions to bill sponsors into the governor's office on this. Um, you know, that's kind of, those are a lot of the bills that we're following currently. Um, we don't expect much in the way of other uh, housing specific bills to be introduced. But one of the things, and Amy and Jennifer touched on this, without um, new money to be able to spend, the governor's office and the legislature have been trying to get creative, and proponents of affordable housing have been trying to get creative around how do you use some existing um, state resources or state investments to make investments in affordable housing. And so we've got some really technical bills this year that have been really interesting to get engaged in. It's not as simple as extending and expanding the state tax credit like we had last year, or creating the new transit-oriented communities tax credit that came with 1313. Like, it hasn't been simple this year, in a lot of kind of technicalities to the legislation that's happened this year. I'm going to pause there and see if there are any um, uh, questions. I see Lee um, gave me an update on 1249 that I hadn't had. So um, thank you for that update. We'll go back and take a look at 1249. But are there any questions about any of those bills that I sped through quickly, or we can wait till the end as well? If you have a question, please raise your hand and then come off mute. You never know how long to have the awkward silence. But I am going to move on. And please forgive this next slide. Our governor inspired me with um, his Star Trekkiness and geekiness for this next slide. So we wanted to talk just really quickly about ways to get involved. How to engage uh, with um, with your legislators and with uh, your decision makers as you go about advocacy and on your own or with the help of Housing Colorado. Um, sorry, that the first place we want to start is just how do you find your legislator? Um, if you go to the General Assembly's webpage, they have a really handy tool. If you go to ledge.colorado.gov, and at the top, you can click on Find My Legislator. It brings you to this page where you can input your address, and I input the address for our office here at 1981 Blake Street in downtown Denver, and it shows you who your state senator and state representative are, and gives you links to their website. So, here in downtown, we've got State Senator Julie Gonzalez and Representative Alex Valdez as our two elected officials here. If you click on the webpage for Senator Gonzalez, it comes up with this page. This is an older version of this. I didn't update this from last year, but things that are important on this page are committee assignments for your legislator, how to get in contact with them via email or their phone, any leadership position that they might hold. If you want to get in contact, it's always a great way to start and to figure out who your legislators are and and where they represent and the committees they serve on. Um, Communicating with legislators is important, especially during the session, but there's also times outside of the legislative session to be able to communicate with them. And so we always like to share this slide about different ways to um, be in touch, calls, emails, visit their website. There's a lot of ways to reach out to your elected officials. They all have aides who um, I've found have been very responsive to um, our our concerns on pieces of legislation, and we've been able to communicate over these types of modes of communication a lot of in a lot of ways. Um, some other opportunities that present themselves are to try and meet with them in person. This is sometimes easier outside a session because they're not as busy, and it's a good opportunity just to get to know um, your representative or your senator on a kind of a one-to-one basis. But also, legislators hold town hall meetings all the time. I know this last weekend there was a town hall in my district where our two state senators and our um, House rep for House District 8, kind of it overlaps with two Senate districts. They all came together and, there was about 80 people in the room talking about the legislative session, asking questions, getting to know legislators. Just encourage you to really try and reach out and get to know and share your concerns with your elected officials. They represent you. You are their constituent. You are uh, the voice for your community, and to be able to represent that and do that often and to do that well, we just encourage you to do that. And if you ever need any help setting up a meeting with a legislator, please reach out to us. We're always happy to help. Finally, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here in a second to get to any questions that folks might have. That's sort of the end of our presentation, but if you ever need me, here's my email address. I'm usually very reachable, and please feel free to talk to me, to call on me if you have concerns about legislation, if you have concerns about what's happening at the legislature. Um, we're always here. We're here for you, the affordable housing community in the state. So I'm going to stop sharing. If you do have any questions, please, yeah, raise your hand and I will call on you and we can go from there. But are there any questions about pending legislation, what's happening at the legislature, concerns you might have, things that we can continue to work on? Don, go ahead.
Thank you. I was wondering about the budget. You said that the money might be similar and not cut for housing, but do you see it shifting in terms of matching or where on the spectrum of housing, low end, middle, missing middle, whatever, that the mix might change, or is it really just going to be the same?
I mean, I think for at least another year, the status quo will prevail, right? So I think we have about the same amount of money, no cuts. I don't think the way in which that money is getting distributed will change fundamentally. Um, Now we start another legislative session in January of 2026, and that could all change at that point. But I think between now and then, we're pretty steady state status quo.
Yeah, I'd agree there. The programs that have been created and funded over the last um, few years, I think will remain the same. And that the mix of, where money goes, how it goes out the door, especially from the Division of Housing will remain the same. Other questions? Y'all are an easy group. Okay, Hillary Cooper, edit. Good to see you, Hillary.
You guys too. Thank you so much. It's been a busy year, so I haven't had a chance to sort of get this high level overview. Appreciate it. And you guys are working on a lot of different housing bills. I just want to say in response to that last question, the thing that is changing that we're seeing is higher requests for less units because interest rates continue to stay high, cost of building continues to be high. So our money is not going as far. And we've been talking about this. We meet weekly, at least within the state we do. And we were expecting it maybe a little bit further out, but we just saw it pretty significantly in our Prop 123 equity round. So the money that we do have currently is just not going to go as far and it's going to get more competitive. So that's the one difference. So thank goodness they didn't cut in anything, but the market is squishing those funds just kind of like Tabor is squishing the budget, if you will.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Hillary.
I'm probably not supposed to
That's
say that. Take that back. Sorry.
well, I can say, having read a Denver Post story today, that the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, there's still some things to come as it regards Tabor and being in a year where we're feeling the effects of Tabor pretty significantly. We'll keep an eye on that. I don't expect it to be like a housing specific, any housing specific proposals, but as we consider what the budget implications might be on housing programs in the future, we'll definitely take a look at those proposals as they come forward. Folks, if there aren't any other questions, um, I will let you have 15 minutes back in your day. Like I said, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to answer your questions, connect you with legislators, dig in on legislation, geek out on the technicalities and the ins and outs of any particular bill. But like I said, and like I said, we represent you, and we stand ready to be of assistance to you in the future. So feel free to reach out, and thanks so much for joining us today. Take care, everybody.